Hello everyone, welcome back. In today's video, we've got another trade room review to discuss. In today's video, we're looking at some signings from our past couple of days, some injury updates, and we've got a couple of very interesting pieces of trade rumors involving the Buffalo Sabres, the Edmonton Oilers, and a couple of other teams. We'll go to all the updates from our past couple of days, coming up right now. Hello everyone, welcome back to the video here at the End-to-End Hockey channel. Now before we begin this video, don't forget to like this video and subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this with all of you guys, so if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. Don't forget to stay tuned for more videos coming out in the very near future. So in today's video, we've got another news room review to discuss as per usual. We'll start off by looking at a couple of signings from our past couple of days. So there were 3 signings we're going to talk about here today. So back over a couple of days ago, we saw the Florida Panthers, one of the RFAs. That was Michael Benning. A couple of years ago, came over from the NCAA. One of the better Florida Panthers prospects. Hasn't really gotten much at the NHL level up to this point in his career, but he's done all right in a couple seasons at the AHL level, putting up 9 goals and 32 points in 54 games last year in his second full season of pro level action. He gets a 1-year league minimum deal from the Florida Panthers. So Benning, I think, will probably start this year at the AHL. Could be a call-up option. Maybe if he does quite well at the AHL, he could find a role in like the third pair for the Florida Panthers. That is a possibility. So very interesting note there. Like I said, it's league minimum, so it's not an overly bad deal for the Panthers. They can bury him in the AHL to start the season, but if he does well, this could be a very good high reward type deal for the Florida Panthers. So very interesting note there. But they have signed Michael Benning to a new deal. Then we saw the Columbus Blue Jackets also sign a RFA to a new deal, and that was Daemon Hunt. Hunt, who spent last year starting the year in Minnesota, finished the season in Columbus after the David Jiricek deal, was an RFA. He was in need of a new contract. He has had some NHL experience in the past couple of years, putting up an assist in 12 games 2 years ago. Then last year he played in a game with Minnesota well before he was dealt. Last year he had 57 games of AHL action, putting up 2 goals and 18 points, which was not overly bad, but wasn't one of his better seasons at the AHL level. So Hunt, I think, eventually will be a solid third pair defenseman for the Blue Jackets. I think there's a very good chance he starts the season at the AHL level this year, but could wind up finding himself at the NHL level eventually. So very interesting note there, and I do think Hunt still has a bright future in the Blue Jackets organization. So very interesting note there, but the Jackets have signed RFA Hunt to a new 1-year league minimum deal. And then the last signing was with a UFA, and that is Travis Hamonic. Hamonic, who had spent the past couple seasons in Ottawa. In the past, he had spent time in the Islanders organization, the Flames organization, the Canucks organization. So he has spent a couple of seasons in a couple of different teams. The past couple of seasons he's been in Ottawa, where Senators fans have been frustrated with him at times. He has wound up signing a 1-year, $1 million deal in the Detroit organization. And I don't like this deal for Detroit. Like, 1 year, $1 million is not going to harm you too much. But like on a defense that already has guys like Cole and Sherratt, which are already liabilities and not overly good on their current contracts, adding a guy like Hamonic, who's not going to be an overly great defensive presence, is probably not the defenseman I think the Red Wings were looking for. He gets a 1-year, $1 million deal. Last year had a goal and 7 points in 59 games in Ottawa, after he had 2 goals and 6 points the previous season in 48 games. So towards the end of the season, he started to become more and more of a healthy scratch in Ottawa, so he lost his role in the top 6. Now, he was probably going to challenge with a couple of guys like a Jacob Bernardacco or Justin Holl for playing time next year. And because of the weak blue line the Red Wings do have, I would not be one bit surprised if Hamonic was able to earn himself some playing time at the NHL level. But still, I don't like this deal overly much from the Red Wings, just given all of their defensive problems right now. So very interesting note there. But the Detroit Red Wings have sent Travis Hamonic to a 1-year, $1 million deal, while Daemon Hunt in Columbus and Michael Benning in Florida have both gotten 1-year league minimum deals. So very interesting note there, but those are all the signings from our past couple of days. Next, going over to a couple of news updates. So we got a couple of very interesting pieces of news. We're going to start off with players signing overseas. Oliver Rodrigue, who was the potential goalie of the future for the Edmonton Oilers and the third stringer for them last year. Jake Bischoff and Gage Quinney, who had spent the past couple seasons in the AHL affiliate for the Vegas Golden Knights, and Adam Ruzicka, who we talked about in a previous videos, potentially wanting to make a comeback to the NHL, who have been playing over in the KHL over the past couple seasons, have all signed in the KHL. So Ruzicka, amongst other differing opinions, is going to stay in the KHL instead of going for an NHL opportunity, while Bischoff, Quinney, who are more AHL level players, and Rodrigue, who at one point was a really solid goalie prospect for the Edmonton Oilers, have all signed overseas in the KHL, while Jacob Zboril, who we also mentioned in a previous video, who wanted to make an NHL level comeback, has re-signed in Czechia with a different team. So very interesting note there, Zboril, Ruzicka, they will stay overseas instead of looking for NHL opportunities. Lafreniere, Quinney, and Rodrigue have also signed overseas, so very interesting note there. Next, going over to a couple of very interesting pieces of news. First, when it comes to 2 injury updates, Tyson Foerster, who we mentioned a while back, had shoulder surgery or wrist surgery, and he was going to be out for a couple of months and probably would miss the start of the season. Apparently, recent updates speculate that Foerster could be ready for the start of the regular season. Probably won't be ready for the start of training camp, but he probably will be ready for the start of the season, and that would be a huge boost to the Philadelphia Flyers to get one of their top 6 forwards back for the beginning of the season, when there was a lot of people speculating they would be without him. So that's very positive news for the Philadelphia Flyers on the Tyson Foerster side. Well, for the Utah Mammoth, top prospect that was taken in the 2025 draft, Caleb Desnoyers, who was taken 4th overall by Utah, has had wrist surgery and will be out for the next 3 months. So he may miss the start of the junior season. He was probably never going to make the NHL lineup, but he'll miss training camp for sure, and he'll probably also miss the start of the junior season. So it might hamper his development a little bit, but still, it's not overly great news there to see one of the top prospects for Utah and Desnoyers be out for the next 3 months. So some very interesting injury updates. Next, going over to Aaron Ekblad, according to a couple of recent reports. I think I saw Jeff Merrick mention this, and maybe a couple of other insiders too. Aaron Ekblad turned down what would have been a massive offer from the Detroit Red Wings to stay with the Florida Panthers organization. According to a couple of recent reports, Detroit was prepared to offer Aaron Ekblad, should he have hit free agency, a massive offer. I haven't seen any money value, but my guess would be it would probably been like a 7 to 8, maybe even an $8.5 million AAV deal on like a 5 or 6 year deal to sign Aaron Ekblad. Now, he obviously did wind up staying in Florida. He winds up staying loyal to the Panthers instead of going and trying to get more money elsewhere. So very interesting note there. I know that money wasn't an overly big concern for Ekblad at this current point in time, so he stays in Florida, but it would have been really interesting to see if Ekblad did hit free agency, what sort of an offer Detroit would have given him, and if he would have considered that. So very interesting note there, but Ekblad may have turned down more money if he would have gone to free agency to stay with Florida, which could have been a big win there for the Panthers. Next, going over to Patrick Maroon. Maroon, who just retired from hockey this past offseason, was looking for another job. He's apparently been hired by a team in the USHL to be an assistant coach. So Maroon's going into coaching just a couple of months after calling it quits on his NHL career. So very interesting note there. We'll have to see how well Maroon does in the USHL as a head coach or assistant coach for that matter. But still, very interesting note there that just a few months after retiring, Patrick Maroon is going to be behind the bench in the USHL. So very interesting note there. And lastly, going over to Marc-Edouard Vlsic, the defenseman, who was one of the few buyouts this year in the San Jose Sharks organization. He's currently UFA. He apparently says that he plans to play this year. So he may have to go to training camp on a PTO. The past couple of seasons in San Jose have not been pretty for Marc-Edouard Vlsic. Been healthy scratched quite a bit. So with all of that in mind, there's been a lot of interesting reports saying that Vlsic is not getting the interest that he's hoping for. So I definitely could see him sign maybe like a PTO. It's probably something that he's going to have to do if he still wants to play for this upcoming season. So we shall see on that. Like maybe he gets a 1 year league minimum deal or a 1 year low AAV deal, but I could definitely see him go to training camp on a PTO to try and prove that he can still play at least like third pair, maybe like a 6'7" defenseman. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But Vlsic does still intend to play at some point this season with the new team. So we shall wait and see on that. But that's all of the news updates, as a few players have signed overseas. Foerster might be ready for the start of the season. Then Desnoyers is going to be out for the next 3 months. Ekblad stayed with Florida and may have given up a big offer from Detroit had he gone to free agency. Maroon is coaching in the USHL, and Vlsic still wants to play at the NHL level this upcoming season. So very interesting note there. And lastly, going over to a couple of trade rumors. So next, going over to a couple of very interesting pieces of news. First, I'm going to touch on here with the Toronto Maple Leafs across an article recently, just sort of looking at what the value might be out there for guys like Calle Jarnkrok and David Kampf, who have been heavily mentioned in the trade rumor mill for the Toronto Maple Leafs. Now, Jarnkrok is making $2.1 million for 1 more season. Kampf is making $2.4 million for 2 more seasons. So Kampf has an extra year on his deal. He's $300,000 expensive, and he plays a more lower lineup role. So I think that in and of itself means that Kampf would have probably less value than a guy like Calle Jarnkrok. The article I saw said that Jarnkrok might still have some value. So if he was to be moved either early in the start of the season or before the season starts, the acquiring team could try and and flip him, maybe even with money retained at the trade deadline, especially if he's having a good season. And he could try and be dealt in like a bigger package that an acquiring team might try and flip at the trade deadline. That is a very likely possibility, whether that be a team like Philadelphia, Chicago, San Jose, Pittsburgh, teams who need some cap space, who could potentially deal someone at the trade deadline. Like, those are some of the teams who I'd keep an eye on when it comes to Calle Jarnkrok, because I do think, even though he's coming off a season where he was very injured, wasn't overly productive last year, he still is a guy who can put up around like 10, 15 goals, 20 to 30, maybe even push 40 points if he's completely healthy in a top 9 role, and teams could definitely use that in the playoffs. And so if the Leafs make some sort of deal with maybe like a bond-blowing team to get Jarnkrok off their books, they could flip him later on. That's a possibility. When it comes to Kampf, I feel like he would probably be more of like a cap dump, like a $2.4 million for 2 years for a fourth-line center. That's not overly great value. We've seen a couple of fourth-line centers get like 1-2 year, $2 million deals this offseason. Kampf is still above that. So I would think that if they were just to move Kampf, they'll probably have to attach a sweetener. It could be like a cap dump in some sort of a bigger trade package. That's also a possibility if the Leafs really want to try and get something with the cap space of David Kampf. That's a possibility, but we'll have to wait and see. I definitely do think those are some very interesting possibilities, but we'll have to keep our eye on the Toronto Maple Leafs. Still very likely chance they'll move 1 or 2 players before a season starts, and Jarnkrok and Kampf are very likely guys, and I think Jarnkrok, with all the aspects, probably a little more likely to get dealt than Kampf, so very interesting note there. Next, going over to the Detroit Red Wings, I saw a recent article linking Nick Robertson to the Detroit Red Wings. Now, apparently, the Red Wings still need some more forward help. Like, they could definitely use 1 to 2 more forwards, especially someone who can play in the top 6, but at least someone who can play in the top 9, and I think Robertson will fit that bill. He can play left wing, he can play center, very versatile type guy. He's a guy who's also, along with Jarnkrok and Kampf, mentioned heavily in the trade rumor mill, and unlike Jarnkrok and Kampf, he has a cheaper cap hit, only signed for 1 more season before as an RFA, and he has a way higher ceiling at this point in time than guys like Jarnkrok and Kampf. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Like, if they were to move him to Detroit, and I still highly doubt that because they're Atlantic rivals, but if he was to be dealt to Detroit, I would think maybe like a 3rd or 2nd round pick, maybe like a decent prospect like a Wallander or a Buim or something like that, Danielson, or maybe some sort of player on the roster. Like, would they maybe want like a young player like maybe a Jonathan Bergeron in return? I would have to wait and see on that, but Robertson could be a really good fit on like the 3rd or 2nd line in the Detroit organization. I would not be one bit surprised if the Red Wings did have some major interest. So I have to wait and see on that, but I saw a recent article saying that Robertson to Detroit might be a possibility. Next, going over to Bob Stauffer, he was talking about the Edmonton Oilers and looking at some of their goaltending options. He was looking at some of the younger goaltenders that they've been linked to recently. That's Sebastian Cossa, Nico Dawes, and Michael DiPietro. Stauffer himself thinks that DiPietro will not be placed on waivers. He thinks they'll find some way to get rid of Korpisalo, whether that be a trade, potentially moving him down waivers, but he thinks that with the amount of teams that would have some major interest in DiPietro, they probably wouldn't place him on waivers. He'll probably be the backup to Swayman this upcoming season. DiPietro has not had very much experience at the NHL level, but is coming off one of his best AHL level seasons last year, and he's a really solid goaltending prospect. Formerly of the Vancouver Canucks, traded to Boston a couple of years ago. Looks like a really solid guy. So even though there's been some speculation out there, especially from Jeff Merrick, that the Bruins placed DiPietro on waivers, the Oilers would instantly claim him. Stauffer thinks that they probably wouldn't move DiPietro. He also says that when it comes to Nico Dawes, he fully expects Dawes to be placed on waivers. The Devils have Markstrom, they have Allen, they have their goaltending duo. They do not need Dawes at the NHL level. He is waivers eligible. So with that in mind, they could try and place him on waivers. That could be a very likely option there for the Edmonton Oilers. Dawes, I think, has potential to be a solid, at the very least, 1B goaltender in the future. And I think Dawes could definitely be a upgrade on a guy like Calvin Pickard. So I could definitely see the Oilers try and go after Nico Dawes if he was to be placed on waivers. And with the Devils goalie duo that they have right now, I could definitely see them place Dawes on waivers. When it comes to Sebastian Cossa, he's not waivers eligible. He's on the younger goaltenders. Stauffer says that the Oilers originally checked on Trey Augustine, but the Red Wings said that that was no starter, so they turned to Cossa. He says that he expects the ask for Cossa to be at least a first-round pick. Now, that's pretty high for what is a goaltending prospect at this time, but with the Red Wings not really needing to make any moves and Cossa being one of their better prospects in their system, they would have a really high ask to move on from him. So if the Oilers are willing to move like a future first-round round pick to try and get Sebastian Cossa, that's probably what it'll have to take. And I'm not sure if the Oilers will really be willing to do that. But if they do get Cossa, that drastically improves their goaltending. Maybe not for this year, but for the future going forward, it really does. So very interesting note there. Like, I think Dawes probably makes the most sense out of those guys. They don't have to give up anything for him, and they can just claim him off of waivers. Like, if DiPietro does go on waivers, I could also see the Oilers take a stab at him. Cossa, I think, might be a little more unlikely right now because of the ask, but if they feel like that's sort of a really good value add for them, I could see him do that. So we'll have to wait and see on that, but those are the updates when it comes to the Oilers and their goaltending. And lastly, going over to Alexis Lafreniere. I saw a recent article from the Hockey News from Michael Agello, and he was talking about how Lafreniere would be a very good fit in the Buffalo Sabres organization. He says that Buffalo would be a really good fit for Alexis Lafreniere because he does really somewhat need a fresh start, and on top of that, he also says that Lafreniere at this point in time doesn't have trade protection, which has been a problem for the Buffalo Sabres trying to acquire players in the past. So at this current point in time, if they were to make a deal in the next year, they wouldn't have to do any sort of trade protection for Lafreniere, which would be very good for Buffalo Sabres. Now, he says that the Rangers, even though Gavrikov was acquired in free agency, the Rangers don't have the best of blue lines. I completely agree with that. They have three solid top four defensemen in Schneider, in Fox, and in Gavrikov, but they could definitely use one more top four defenseman, not thrust guys like Vanakainen more or Borgen into a top four role, which I don't think any of them are suited for. So if they could try and acquire a defenseman, which is something that Buffalo's been saying recently, they could easily try and move. That might be a really smart move there for the Rangers. Now, he says that they may try and push for Power, but Power's still a really good defenseman, so he wonders if maybe Buffalo could try and push in a trade package for them getting Bowen Byram back. Byram recently just signed a deal. He was an RFA, but there's still a lot of speculation out there that Byram could easily get moved in the very near future still. So we'll have to wait and see on that. Once again, I'm not saying that they're talking or anything. This is just pure speculation, but I could definitely see Lafreniere be a good fit in Buffalo. Add him to a top six that already has guys like Thompson, Quinn, as well as guys like Tuck and all those other guys in the top six. That would be a scary top six going forward if you add Alexis Lafreniere, and if Lafreniere can find that next gear he did a couple of seasons ago in the Rangers organization. And once again, I think Byron will have to be a starter point of a package that would be dealt to the Rangers for Lafreniere. So we'll have to wait and see on that. But that's all I'm talking for today. I left you guys thoughts. Do you think Lafreniere would be a good fit in the Buffalo Sabres organization, potentially for a package involving Bowen Byram? Who do you think is the most likely to go to Edmonton? Cossa, Dawes, DiPietro? Like, who do you think would be the best one? Could you see Robertson go to the Detroit Red Wings? Yarncroke, Camp? What do you think the value is for them on the open market? Definitely your thoughts on all of that, plus all the news updates and the signings from the past couple of days. That's all I'm going to talk for today. Remember to like this video, and if you're related to me, subscribe below. Thank you for all of your support. I would never be able to do this without you guys. So if you haven't already, don't forget the subscribe button down below. Don't forget to comment. We're on the road to 1,000 subscribers. I also do a blog to news, rumors, analysis, stuff like that. So check that out. I'll link to that in the description below. Can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.